Alright, so this is going to be a review of the previous unit, and the reason why is I want to make sure that you are comfortable writing the name of ionic compounds and then also writing the formula for ionic compounds. There's going to be some work with molecular compounds, but not as much, so I wanted to focus on ionic compounds for right now. So, for the purposes of this class, there are two different ionic compounds that we can deal with, two different types. The first one are ionic compounds that have metals of known charge. All right, so which metals does this include? This includes your group 1, okay, your alkali metals, your group 2, your group 3, right, with boron, aluminum at the top, and then you have two exceptions. You have zinc, which always has a +2 charge, and then silver, which is +1. So for these examples, I always know the charge of the metal. The other type of ionic compound I can deal with is metals of unknown charge. Now, this includes your transition metals. So the only way for me to know the charge of these metals is to look at a formula or to be told, because if I look at the periodic table, that doesn't tell me what the charge is. That only works, though, looking at the periodic table, it only works for metals of known charge. For these guys, I can look at the periodic table and automatically know the charge based on the trends that we talked about before. So I'm first going to start with taking the name of an ionic compound and creating the formula from it. So for my first example, I've got copper sulfate. Notice I have a 2 right here. What that tells me is that copper has a 2+ charge. Sulfate is one of my polyatomic ions, so you've got to find it on the chart. It's SO4 with a 2- charge. So what I have to do is cross my charges. So the 2 becomes the subscript of SO4. This 2 becomes a subscript of Cu. Remember, since you've got a 2 and a 2, they will cancel, so you end up with just CuSO4. There's your formula for copper 2 sulfate. For the next problem, sodium phosphide. Sodium has a +1 charge, always. I can tell that by looking at the periodic table. That's why I didn't include the Roman numeral for this one. Phosphide, be careful, it's not phosphate or phosphite. It's just phosphide, so it's just P, and P has a 3- charge. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cross my charges. So the charge of 1 becomes a subscript of P, charge of 3 becomes a subscript for Na, and so this will be Na3P. And that's my formula for sodium phosphide. Remember, the reason why I'm crossing my charges is to make sure that the ionic compounds that I create, this formula, has no charge, because ionic compounds cannot have a net charge. I'm going to work on this next one. Aluminum, Al, is group 3, so it has a +3 charge. That's why I didn't include a Roman numeral here. Carbonate is a polyatomic ion. If you look it up on this table, it's CO3 right there. So I'm going to write CO3, it has a 2- charge. And now all I have to do is cross my charges. So the charge of aluminum, the 3 becomes the subscript for CO3, the 2 becomes the subscript for aluminum, and so I end up with Al2CO3. Remember, since there's more than one of my polyatomic ion, I've got to put parentheses around my polyatomic ion, and the subscript is a 3. Alright, now I'm going to flip this, and I'm now going to write the name based on the formula. So keep in mind, if I know the charge of the metal, right, the metal is the one that always goes first, then I do not need to include a Roman numeral. If I don't know the charge, then I need to include the Roman numeral. So for sodium, sodium is a group 1 metal, it's an alkali metal, therefore I know the charge, so I don't have to include it in my name. So this is just going to be sodium. NO3 is one of my polyatomic ions. It is right here. It's nitrate. And that's it. Nickel is a transition metal, therefore I do not know the charge of nickel. So I've got to think about this. Cyanide, Cn, has a -1 charge. Okay, each cyanide, each Cn has a -1 charge. It's one of my polyatomic ions right here. Since there are 2 of them total, what that tells me is that Cn contributes a total charge of -2. To cancel out this -2 charge, I know that now that nickel must have a +2 charge. So when I'm writing the name for this compound, I've got to include the charge for nickel because I can't tell it by looking at the periodic table. So I'm going to write nickel, charge is +2, so 1, 2, and then Cn is cyanide. And that's it. Last one, silver phosphate. At first, I might think, well, silver is a transition metal, therefore I don't know the charge. But remember, silver is an exception. So I do know the charge of silver is always +1. Therefore, I do not need to include the charge in the name. So this is silver. PO4 is one of my polyatomic ions. It's right here. It's phosphate. So I'll write that. And that's it. That's all there is to it.